Your son earned nothing, Mom said. Not after he exposed your brother's kid at homecoming. My son had told everyone the team captain was benched all season. I said nothing. Took the $12,000 saved for the backyard deck and bought him a used Mustang. He posted one photo. By sunrise, Dad had called 19 times. Owen didn't raise his voice. He just stood up, looked at his phone, and started reading numbers. Bench log, week 1 through week 9. The scout in row 12 stopped writing. My nephew stopped smiling. And my mother, somewhere in the stands, started making a list of everything my son would never deserve. That was a Friday night in October. By the following Tuesday morning, I had spent $12,000 on a used Mustang and filed a formal occupancy review on the house my parents had been living in for 6 years. I want to explain how we got there. My name is Warren. I am 42 years old. I have worked for the county assessor's office for 14 years, the last 4 as a senior assessor. My job is to know what property is worth, not what people feel it should be worth, not what they paid for it in 1987 or what their neighbor believes based on nothing. What it is actually worth on paper right now, according to the recorded documents. I do not guess. I do not go by feeling. I look at the record and I tell you what it says. I own 2 properties. The first is my house, a 3-bedroom on Delaney Street that I bought 8 years ago and paid off last spring. The second is my parents' house on Garfield Avenue, which I purchased from them 6 years ago when the property taxes got too high for their retirement income to handle. I paid full market value, $187,000, in installments over 2 years. I transferred the deed. I have been paying the property taxes every year since. My parents pay nothing to live there. That was my decision. I did not announce it at family dinners or bring it up in conversations. It was not a bargaining chip. It was not a favor I was storing for later. It was just what you do when the people who raised you need help and you have the means to help them. Owen is 16. He lives with me full-time. He is tall and quiet, and he got a job at a tire shop on Saturdays that he found himself. He reads box scores the way some kids read comics. He keeps a spiral notebook for county football stats that he has been updating since he was 13. Not on his phone, an actual spiral notebook, handwriting neat, 1 mark per game. The estimate for the backyard deck had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 4 months. Folded in thirds. Contractor's letterhead. $12,000 for $100 for pressure-treated pine and composite rails. I kept meaning to call him back. I just never did. My brother Randall is 3 years older than me. His son Tanner is 17. For as long as I can remember, Tanner has been the one the family talks about in a different tone. Not louder, just differently. There is a specific register people shift into when they are describing someone they have already decided matters. It is a small thing. You notice it or you don't. I noticed it the first time at Randall's 40th birthday dinner 6 years ago. My dad gave a toast. He stood at the head of the table with a glass of Merlot and talked about Randall for about 4 minutes. He talked about what Randall had built, the landscaping company, the accounts, the way he had turned a small operation into something real. Then he talked about Tanner. He said Tanner was going to be something special. He said it like a fact. He said it like something he had already checked on and confirmed. He talked about Tanner for 2 minutes. Then he looked at me and said, "And Warren's boy is doing fine." That was the whole sentence. Warren's boy is doing fine. He picked up his glass and drank. Owen was 9 years old and sitting 3 chairs down. I did not know if he heard it. I know I did. The second time was when Tanner turned 16. My parents gave him a car. Not a beater, not a project. A 3-year-old Honda Civic. Clean title, 40,000 miles, dark blue. My dad drove it to Randall's house with a red bow on the hood, and my mom recorded the whole thing on her phone. I watched the video because Randall sent it to the family group chat. In the video, Tanner walks out the front door and sees the car, and my dad puts the keys in his hand and says, "You earned this, son." The summer I turned 16, my dad handed me a bus pass and told me that working for things builds character. I thought about pointing this out once. I decided it was not worth it. The third time was when Randall needed a co-signer on a business loan. $40,000. He was expanding the landscaping company, needed new equipment, needed the credit. He called my dad on a Thursday. By Monday, my dad had co-signed. No hesitation, no conditions, no long conversation about responsibility or risk. He just did it because Randall needed it done. I had never asked my parents for money in my life. I had also, it was now clear, never been considered for the offer. The fourth incident was the most recent. 3 weeks before homecoming, I had driven Owen to my parents' house for Sunday dinner. Tanner was there, and he had been doing what he always did, which was telling stories about himself that everyone in the room received as documentary fact. He was telling the family about the football season, about being team captain, about the leadership role, the responsibility, what it meant to be out front. My dad was leaning forward in his chair the way he always did when Tanner spoke, elbows on the table, nodding before the sentences finished. My mom had already refilled Tanner's glass twice without being asked. Owen sat across from me. He ate his food. He nodded when someone spoke to him. He was the most polite person in the room, which in my family meant he was invisible. On the drive home, he looked out the passenger window for a while. Then he said, "Dad, Tanner hasn't started a game since week 2. He got benched. He's been telling them he's the captain, but he's not even dressing most weeks." I said, "I know." He turned and looked at me. "You knew. I follow the scores." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And you just let him say it." I said, "It's not my story to correct." Owen looked back out the window. He said, "Okay, just that. Okay." But the way he said it was the way you say okay when you have filed something away and you're going to think about it later on your own. I did not ask him what he was thinking. I probably should have. The homecoming game was on a Friday. I sat in the stands with my hands in my jacket pockets and watched Tanner stand on the sideline in street clothes while the actual team captains wore their jerseys on the field and ran the coin toss. He looked fine. That was the thing I kept returning to. He was standing near the end zone with 2 friends, laughing about something, completely at ease. He had been telling our family that he was leading this team for 2 months, and he was standing on the sideline in jeans, looking fine. Halftime. The team captains were introduced at the microphone. 4 names. Tanner's was not among them. Then, after the introduction, there was a short homecoming ceremony. Student council president. A few awards. And then Tanner walked up to the microphone. I do not know how he arranged that. I do not know if he spoke to someone beforehand or if he simply walked up and no one stopped him. What I know is that he stood at that microphone and introduced himself as team captain of the Millfield Wildcats to a crowd of roughly 400 people. He thanked his coaches. He thanked his family. He said it had been an honor to lead this team, and he was proud of every one of his guys. Row 12. A man in a gray jacket with a legal pad balanced on his knee. He had been writing things down since the first quarter. He stopped writing when Tanner started speaking and started again partway through. Owen was sitting 3 rows above me. I did not know he had the bench log with him. I found out later that he had been keeping it since week 3. 1 entry per Friday. Date in the left margin, Tanner's game status on the line next to it. Dressed or did not dress. Started or did not start. The notebook was spiral-bound, about 60 pages, and the entries were in the same neat handwriting he used for everything. He told me later that he had started keeping it because he wanted to know the truth. Not to use it, just to know it. He said there is something that bothers him about a record being wrong and nobody fixing it. He stood up. He did not yell. He did not make a scene. He looked at his phone where he had photographed the notebook pages, and he read. Week 1, Tanner Pruitt started. Week 2, Tanner Pruitt started. Week 3, Tanner Pruitt did not dress. Week 4 did not dress. Week 5, inactive. Week 6 through week 9, inactive, sideline. It took about 40 seconds. The man in row 12 had stopped writing. Tanner stepped back from the microphone. He did not look up into the stands. He looked at the field. I sat with my hands in my jacket pockets, and I did not move. After a moment, someone started the sound system back up. The ceremony moved on. The crowd resettled. But the man in row 12 did not start writing again. He capped his pen and put it in his jacket pocket and spent the rest of halftime looking at the field. My mother called before I reached the parking lot. I answered because I always answered. She said, "Do you know what your son just did?" I said I was there. She said, "He humiliated Tanner in front of everyone. In front of a college scout, Warren. Do you understand what that means for that boy? Do you have any idea what Randall and his wife have been working toward?" I said, "Tanner said he was the team captain." "He's not the team captain." She said, "That is not the point." Her voice had gone flat the way it did when she had already decided she was right and was just waiting for me to finish being wrong. The point is that your son chose to embarrass his cousin in front of 400 people. He chose to do that, and I need you to understand that there are consequences for that choice. I said, "What consequences?" She said, "Your father and I have been working on something. Something for the family. And whatever we had thought about, including Owen in that, whatever future we had imagined, that is off the table now. Your son made his choice tonight, and his choice has a cost." I said, "Mom." She said, "He earned nothing. Not after this." I said, "Okay." She said, "I need you to hear me, Warren. This is not something I am saying in a moment. This is where we are." I said, "I heard you." I hung up. I drove home. Owen was quiet in the passenger seat the entire way. When I pulled in the driveway, I turned the engine off and sat there. The porch light was on. There was a moth hitting the glass above it, hitting it and falling back and hitting it again. I watched it for a while. 11 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when I got in and again when I got out. I went inside. I knocked on Owen's bedroom door. He was sitting at his desk with a spiral notebook open in front of him. He looked up. I said, "You did the right thing." He said, "I know." I said, "The scout was in row 12. He said, "I saw him during the second quarter. He was writing down the stats from the field. I thought if he was going to be writing things down, they should be accurate." He paused. "I didn't do it to hurt Tanner." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "I did it because the record was wrong." I looked at him for a moment. He looked exactly like someone who had done a reasonable thing and was genuinely puzzled that it required this much explanation. I said, "Put the notebook away." He closed it and set it on the corner of the desk. I said, "Get some sleep." I went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed. My phone was on the nightstand, and it was buzzing with the family group chat, and I turned it face down and did not pick it up. Saturday morning. I woke up at 6:15 and lay in bed for a few minutes listening to the house. Owen was still asleep. I got up, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen counter. The contractor's estimate was folded in thirds next to the coffee maker. $12,000 for $100. I picked it up, unfolded it, looked at it for a moment, and put it back down. I went to the bank when they opened at 9. I withdrew $12,000 as a cashier's check. The teller, a young woman named Keisha, who had processed my deposits for 3 years, glanced at the amount and then looked at me and said, "Everything okay, Mr. Pruitt?" I said, "Yeah, good, actually." She printed the check. I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket. I knocked on Owen's door at 10. He came out in jeans and a gray hoodie, looking exactly the way he always looked, like nothing had happened and nothing was going to happen that he couldn't handle. I told him to get in the truck. He said, "Where are we going?" I said, "We're looking at a car." He stopped in the hallway. He looked at me. He said, "A car." I said, "Get your jacket." He got his jacket. We went to 2 lots that were wrong, and then a third one on Route 9 that had a 2017 Mustang, Oxford White, V6, 81,000 miles. The back bumper had a small dent. The interior was clean. The price was $11,800. I told the salesman we wanted to start it. Owen got in the driver's seat. He sat there with both hands on the wheel and turned the key, and the engine came up, and he just sat with it. He didn't rev it or test anything. He just listened. Both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, listening to the engine idle for almost 30 seconds. I stood next to the car and watched him. He turned the engine off. He got out and stood next to me. We both looked at the car for a moment. He said, "Dad." I said, "Yeah." He didn't say anything else. I said, "Wait here." I went inside and paid. On the drive home, Owen drove his car and I followed in my truck. We pulled onto Delaney Street and he parked in the driveway and got out and stood next to it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he took his phone out and took one photo. Just the car and the driveway and the edge of the porch railing in the background. He posted it without a caption. He looked at me over the roof of the car. I said, "Hungry?" He said, "Yeah." We went inside. The contractor's estimate was still on the counter. I picked it up and dropped it in the recycling bin. By sunrise Sunday, my father had called 19 times. I did not answer any of them. I listened to 3. The first one, left at 11:42 Saturday night, was careful. His voice was the version he used when he was managing something. Even measured, no edge. He said, "Warren, it's Dad. Listen, I know tonight was a lot, and I know your mother said some things that probably landed hard. I want you to know I'm not calling to pile on. I just think it's important that we talk before this gets bigger than it needs to be. There are things happening in this family right now that are bigger than a football game, and I need you to be a part of that conversation. Call me when you can. I love you, son. I played it twice. I noted the phrase things happening in this family right now. I noted that he did not mention what those things were. I noted that he said, I love you at the end, which he did approximately 4 times a year, always when he needed something. The 7th voicemail, left at 2:17 Sunday morning, was different. He said, Warren, I've called you 6 times tonight. I understand you're upset, but I need you to hear me when I say that this is not just about homecoming. There are things moving right now, real things, things that involve this family's future, and your feelings about what happened at a football game are going to need to wait. I need you to be a grown-up about this. Call me back. He said feelings the way people say feelings when they want to make clear they do not consider your feelings to be serious information. The 17th voicemail, left at 6:49 Sunday morning, was 12 seconds. He said, Warren, it's Dad. Please just call me back. No frame. No management. No positioning. Just a man who had been awake all night asking his son to pick up the phone. I deleted all 19. Then I made coffee and opened my laptop and went to the county property database. I typed in the address on Garfield Avenue. The record came up in 4 seconds. Owner of record, Warren D. Pruitt. Transfer date, April 14th, 6 years ago. Purchase price, $187,000. Current assessed value, $231,400. Property tax account, current. Account holder, Warren D. Pruitt. Current occupants, family members, informal residential arrangement. No lease, no rental agreement, no signed occupancy document. I sat with that for a moment. In 14 years as an assessor, I have processed more informal family property arrangements than I can count. The pattern is always the same. Someone holds the deed, someone else lives there, everyone agrees, it is understood, and nobody writes anything down. These arrangements work fine until something changes. And something always changes. What I was beginning to understand was that something had already changed. I just had not been told. I picked up my phone and called Diane Okafor. She has been at the assessor's office for 12 years and processes all occupancy and tenancy filings. She answered on the second ring. I said, Diane, I need to flag a property for occupancy review. She said, sure, what's the address? I gave it to her. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, Warren, that's your parents' address. I said, I know. Another pause. Longer this time. Then she said, okay, you want me to flag it internal, just for our records, or send the standard county notice to the address on file? I said, standard notice. She said, all right, I'll process it Monday morning. It'll go out in the regular mail run. I said, thank you, Diane. She said, you got it. And then, before she hung up, she said, Warren, just my name. A pause. Then, okay, like she had started to say something and decided against it. That was the whole conversation. I closed the laptop. I sat at the kitchen table for a while. Then I went out to the driveway and stood next to the Mustang. The morning was cold and quiet. I put my hand on the hood. The metal was cold. I went back inside and put the Mustang keys on the counter where the contractor's estimate used to be. My father stopped calling on Monday. My mother called on Tuesday. I answered because I had decided I wanted to hear what she would say when given the space to say it. She said, I want to talk to you properly, without the emotion of Friday night. I said, okay. She said, I love Owen. I want you to know that. Whatever I said on Friday, I said in a moment. He is my grandson and I love him. I said, I know you do. She said, but Warren, what he did had consequences that you may not fully understand. That scout from Lakefield College had been in contact with Randall's family for 3 months. 3 months of emails, a campus visit, conversations about Tanner's role on the team. And what Owen did on Friday put all of that in jeopardy. I said, Tanner was not the team captain. She said, I understand that, but there's a way to handle that privately. There is a way to let Randall's family know without making it a public spectacle. Owen chose to stand up in front of 400 people. I said, he chose to tell the truth. She said, Warren, her voice shifted. It became the voice she used when she had decided to be patient with me. I know you believe that. And in a perfect world, the truth is always the right answer. But we do not live in a perfect world. We live in a family. And in a family, how you say things matters as much as what you say. I said, so the problem is that he said it in public. She said, the problem is that he did not think about the cost to the people around him. I said, Mom, Tanner stood at a microphone and told 400 people, including a college scout, that he was the team captain. He is not the team captain. He has not dressed for a game since week 2. Owen had a notebook with the records. He corrected the record. She said, and now the scout is not returning Randall's calls. I said, that is not Owen's fault. She said, I am not saying it is entirely his fault. I am saying that actions have consequences, and your son's actions had consequences for this family. And I need you to be able to hear that. I said, I hear you. She said, your father wants to talk to you about something. Something important. Something that was supposed to be good news for everyone. I hope that what happened Friday is not going to make that conversation harder than it needs to be. I said, what is this something? She said, that is for your father to tell you. I just want you to come to that conversation ready to listen. Can you do that for me? I said, I can listen. She said, thank you, Warren. Her voice warmed slightly. I mean about Owen. I love that boy. I just need him to understand that this family has to work together. We all have to work together. I said, I'll talk to him. I hung up. I did not talk to Owen. My father did not call that week. He was, I understood later, waiting to see if I would call first. When I did not, he sent Randall. Randall called on Wednesday. He started the way he always started when someone had sent him to deliver something, a little too casual, a little too friendly, working up to the actual reason for the call. He said, hey, how you doing? I said, good. You? He said, yeah, good. Listen, I know it's been a weird week. Mom told me she talked to you. I said she did. He said, she means well. You know how she is. She gets protective. I said, I know. He said, Tanner's doing okay, by the way. In case you were wondering. He's embarrassed, but he'll get past it. I said, good. He said, the scout situation is what it is. It might work out, it might not. We're not banking everything on that one door. He paused. But hey, that's not actually why I called. I said, okay. He said, Dad's got something he wants to talk to you about. A real estate thing. He's been looking at a property on the east side of the county, a 3-unit rental building. Good location, solid rents. He's been putting together a structure for it with me and Linda, and the structure works really cleanly if the Garfield Avenue property is part of the collateral picture. He paused again. It would be a family investment. You'd have a stake in a rental income once the building is operating. I said, how long has this been in the works? He said, about 1.5 years. We've been pretty quiet about it, trying to get all the pieces in place before we brought it to everyone. I said 1.5 years. He said, give or take, yeah? Dad's been pretty confident you'd be on board. He said, Randall stopped. I could hear him deciding something on the other end of the line. Then he said it anyway. He said you'd be the easy one. I said, yeah. He said, I don't mean anything by that. I'm just telling you what he said. He thinks of you as reliable. That's a compliment coming from him. I said, I know. He said so. Can I tell him you're open to talking? I said, you can tell him I heard you. He said, that's okay. I'll pass that on. Another pause. Warren, is there something I should know? Is something going on? I said, I'll talk to you soon, Randall. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table, and I thought about the phrase Dad always said you'd be the easy one. I thought about it for a long time. I want to be honest about something. When I was sitting in that driveway Friday night, watching a moth hit the porch light over and over, part of me wanted to call my mother back and ask her one question. Just one. Do you understand what you said to me? Not to Owen. To me. You have been telling me what my son is worth since he was old enough to sit at your dinner table. You told me with every toast you gave for Tanner. You told me with every conversation that ended with Warren's boy is doing fine. And now you have said it out loud, with words, on a Friday night in a parking lot. Here, nothing. I did not make that call. I'm not proud of why. It was not patience, and it was not strategy. It was that I had spent 42 years in a family where asking to be understood was not a conversation. It was an invitation to be told why you were wrong about your own experience. So I didn't call. I sat with it. And when Randall said Dad always said you'd be the easy one, something clarified. There's a version of reliability that the people around you will call a character trait when they need it and a personality flaw when they don't. I have been reliable my entire adult life. I bought the house. I paid the taxes. I showed up to every dinner, every graduation party, every Sunday roast where my nephew was celebrated and my son was an afterthought. I was the easy one. What I have come to understand is that there's a difference between being dependable and being absent from your own life. One of them is a virtue. The other is a role someone else wrote and put your name on. I do not know yet exactly what the conversation with my father is going to look like, but I know it is coming. And I know something now that I did not know 3 weeks ago. If this story is landing somewhere for you, stay with it. If you have ever been the one in your family who holds things together and gets thanked for it exactly never, stay with it. Subscribe if you haven't. What comes next is the part that matters. Thursday afternoon. I was at my desk at the assessor's office working through a stack of residential filings when Phil Ostrander stopped at my desk. Phil has been at the office 9 years. He works commercial. We eat lunch together 2 or 3 times a week, and we talk mostly about work and sometimes about his daughter's soccer schedule and occasionally about nothing in particular. He dropped a folder on the edge of my desk and said, "Heard you filed on the Garfield property." I said, "Yeah." He pulled the chair out across from my desk and sat down in it. He laced his hands together and looked at me. He said, "You've been paying taxes on that place for 6 years, and they didn't know you'd actually use the deed?" I thought about the best way to answer that. I said, "They knew I held the deed. They didn't believe I'd treat it like I held the deed." He nodded slowly. He said, "There a lease on the place?" I said, "No." He said, "Any written occupancy agreement?" I said, "No." He said, "Any documentation of the arrangement at all?" I said, "A verbal conversation my father had with me 18 months ago in which he told me the arrangement was solid." Phil was quiet for a moment. He looked at the folder he had dropped on my desk. Then he said, I said, "Yeah." He picked up the folder and stood. He said, "That's a thing, Warren." He said it the way you say something when you want a person to know you understand exactly what they are dealing with without making a production of it. Then he went back to his desk. I sat there for a minute. There was something in the plainness of that. That's a thing. That landed better than anything more would have. Friday evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone and my laptop. I had been thinking about the timing. 18 months. Randall had said the plan had been in the works for a year and a half. My father's conversation with me. The arrangement is solid. Don't worry. Everything is understood. That was 18 months ago. A Sunday dinner. After the meal, coffee. He had been calm and deliberate about it. I want to check something. I went into the county property database and ran a title search history on the Garfield Avenue address. Title searches are public record. Any search ever run on a property in the county goes into the log with a date and the name of the requesting firm. It took about 40 minutes to find. A title search had been ordered on the Garfield Avenue address by a local real estate firm called Hendricks & Bale. Date on the search request: 8 days after the Sunday dinner where my father told me the arrangement was solid. 8 days. He sat across from me in the kitchen of the house I own and told me everything was understood and stable and that I should not worry. And 8 days later, he had a title company run a search on that property, presumably to see if there were any liens or encumbrances that would complicate using it as collateral. He was not reassuring me. He was taking inventory. He was checking what he had before he committed it to someone else. I closed the laptop. I looked at the Mustang keys on the counter for a long time. Then I looked at the space where the contractor's estimate used to be. 3 weeks after homecoming, a number I did not recognize appeared on my phone. I answered. My father said, "Warren, it's Dad." I said, "I know." He said, "Thank you for picking up. I know I've been trying to reach you, and I know you've needed some space. I respect that. I think we need to talk." I said, "Okay." He said, "I want to say first that your mother spoke in the moment on homecoming night. She was upset, and she said things she regrets. She loves Owen. That has not changed." I said, "All right." He said, "And I understand that the way this was handled, with Randall reaching out, with the indirect conversations, I understand that was not ideal. I should have called you myself sooner. That's on me." I said, "Okay." He said, "I want to tell you about the property, about what we have been working on. because I think when you hear the full picture, you will see that this is a good thing. For everyone. I said, go ahead. He said, there's a 3-unit rental building on Grover Street on the east side of the county. It listed 6 months ago at $365,000, and through some very patient negotiating, we have it under contract at $340,000. Good bones. Long-term tenants in 2 of the 3 units. The 3rd unit turns over every year, which actually gives us some flexibility on the rent. The numbers on this building, Warren, are solid. I said, okay. He said, the financing structure requires a secondary collateral instrument. The lender we've been working with needs something attached to the note. And the Garfield Avenue property, given its assessed value and its clean title, is the right instrument for this structure. All it requires from you is a signature on the collateral agreement. That is it. One document. I said, what's the return structure? He said, 12% of net rental income paid quarterly. Once the building is operating at full occupancy, we are looking at somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000 a year to you. It is not a fortune, but it is passive income, and it builds equity in a family asset. I said, and the Garfield Avenue property serves as collateral for the full note. He said, that's right. I said, so if the investment underperforms and the note goes into default, Garfield Avenue is the first asset at risk. He was quiet for a moment. He said, the building is not going to underperform, Warren. We have done the analysis. I said, I'm sure you have. He said, I need you to trust me on this. I have been in real estate transactions my entire adult life. I know what a good deal looks like. I said, Dad. He said, what? I said, I initiated an occupancy review on the Garfield Avenue property 3 weeks ago. You should have received the county notice by now. Silence. I counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Then he said, I just need to understand what you want. His voice had changed completely. The management voice was gone. The certainty was gone. What was left was something I had never heard from him before. He sounded like a man who had walked into a room expecting furniture and found the floor gone. I said, I know, Dad. He said, Warren. I said, I'll talk to you soon. I hung up. I set the phone on the table. I sat there for a while. The house was quiet. Owen was at work. The county notice had been sent to the Garfield Avenue address. Standard procedure. It went in the regular mail. My mother had opened it. She had opened a piece of county mail addressed to the owner of the property she lived in, and she had read that the owner had initiated a formal occupancy review of the residential status of the address. I was not there when she opened it. I do not know if she opened it deliberately or just because it came with the regular mail. What I know is that when she read it, she went to my father. What my father did next was call Randall. Randall told me this himself. He called 4 days after I hung up on my father. The intermediary voice was gone completely. He sounded like someone who had just finished a very long meeting he had not asked to be in. He said, the deal is done. Off the table. I said, okay. He said, Dad, try to move the financing forward this week. The title company runs a search as standard procedure, and the occupancy review flagged. Our lender said they won't proceed with a property in active review as the collateral instrument. The other family we were partnering with on the investment, they pulled back when they heard. They don't want the complication. I said, I'm sorry it fell apart. He said, are you? I said, for your part in it, yeah. He was quiet. Then he said, Dad told me he had you squared away. Those are the words he used. He had you squared away. I did not know he hadn't actually talked to you. Not really talked to you. I thought when he said that, he meant you had discussed it and you were on board. I didn't know. He just meant you were the kind of person who didn't usually say no. I said, I know. He said, I should have asked more questions. I should have called you myself at the beginning instead of waiting for him to do it. A pause. I'm sorry for my part in it, Warren. I said, I know you are. We were quiet for a moment. He said, what happens now? With the house. I said, nothing changes. They live there. I own it. The review is just a review. He said, they don't know that. I said, I know. He said, she's not doing great. I said, I'll reach out when I'm ready. He said, okay. Another pause. Owen doing all right? I said, he's good. Working Saturdays. Saving his money. Randall made a sound that might have been a laugh. He said, yeah. He's going to be all right, that kid. I said, yeah. He said, okay, talk soon. He hung up. Later that week, he sent me a text message. It said, Dad told me he had you squared away. I didn't know about the review. I didn't know he hadn't talked to you for real. I should have asked more questions. I'm sorry for my part in it. 47 words. I read it twice. I typed back, okay. I'm in it as the full version of okay, which is, I understand, I accept this, we're not done, but we are not broken either. The rental property deal closed 4 months later without the Garfield collateral. Randall and his wife found a different financing structure. I know this because it is public record. I saw it one Tuesday afternoon in the county database while I was processing other filings. I closed the tab and kept working. 14 months have passed. I hired the contractor in April. The deck cost $9,400. Pressure-treated pine, composite rails, exactly as quoted. It took 4 days to build. Owen helped on the second and third days, driving screws in the afternoon after his shift at the tire shop. He had not asked why I was finally building it. He just showed up with his work boots on and did the work. I paid the remaining $2,600 to his college fund. Owen is 17 now. He still works Saturdays. He has been saving since he was 16, and he tracks his savings the same way he tracked the bench log, one entry at a time, in the same spiral notebook, dated in the left margin. He showed it to me once, not to get a reaction, just because he was at the kitchen table doing it, and I walked by. Column for income, column for expenses, column for balance. Neat, consistent, for no audience but himself. The occupancy review on Garfield Avenue is still open. Nothing has been filed beyond the initial notice. I have made no additional moves. My parents continue to live there. I continue to pay the property taxes. What has changed is that there is a piece of county paper in the mail history for that address that says the owner initiated a review. Everyone now knows what that means. That is the only thing that has changed. My mother has not called me since homecoming night. I do not know if that is her choice or if she is waiting for me to call first. I have not made a decision about it. I am giving it time. My father left one voicemail 6 weeks after our phone call. I listened to it on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in my truck in the county parking lot with the engine off. He said my name. He said he wanted to find a way to have a real conversation. He said he missed Owen. He did not try to explain or reframe or manage. His voice was just his voice, the one underneath the managing voice. I sat in the parking lot for a while after the voicemail ended. Then I drove home. I drove past Garfield Avenue on the way. The lights were on in the front room. I did not slow down. Tanner did not receive an offer from the D3 school. Randall mentioned it in passing the one time we have properly spoken since. He said Tanner was looking at community college and possibly trying again next year. He said it without the tone. It was just information. On a Saturday in March, Owen drove his Mustang to the tire shop for his shift and parked it in the employee lot. A regular customer came in for a rotation and asked whose car that was. Owen said mine. The customer looked at it for a moment and said, nice car. Owen said, thank you. That was the entire exchange. He came home that afternoon and mentioned it at dinner and then went to his room to do homework. The week after that, I called the contractor. Owen kept that bench log for 7 weeks before he ever used it. Nobody asked him to. Nobody knew he was doing it. He just thought that if the record existed, it should be accurate. He got that from somewhere. If this story sat with you, share it with someone who knows what it is to be the reliable one. The one who holds things together quietly and wonders if any of it is ever actually seen. It is seen. The record exists. If you have not subscribed yet, hit the button now. More stories are coming, and every one of them is about what happens when quiet people finally stop being the easy ones.